Welcome back to the virtual hangar. It is my favorite time of the year, so we're going to do a Shark Week embroidery sampler. Your kit will include one 6-inch embroidery hoop, one 9-inch square of cotton, a light blue, a middle blue, and a dark blue skein of embroidery thread, one needle, and one Shark Week embroidery sampler pattern. If you haven't done the previous embroidery sampler, if this is your first time trying embroidery, I would recommend you clicking on this link and watching or trying that one first. You will need a little bit more practice to do this one because this one is a little bit tougher. To start with, we are going to prepare our piece of fabric with our pattern on it. Go ahead and lay your cotton on top of the pattern and trace it with a pencil. I'm going to do a little movie magic to do this a little bit faster. You just want to make sure you get all the lines that are on the piece of paper in about the right, arrangement that they are onto the fabric. I'm going to kind of gloss over some of the prep work of getting your hoop ready in this video. Because I did cover it in the last one, but we're going to go ahead and stretch our fabric over the inner hoop, stretch our wider hoop around it, tighten it, and make sure that that fabric is nice and tight like a drum. And that's our hoop all prepared. Next, we are going to prepare our thread. So I usually work with 18 inches or 2 feet-ish of thread in one color at a time. I go ahead and thread my needle and leave a tail with, like 6 inches or so, however long, so that you're not accidentally unthreading the needle. You have to rethread it all the time. And then I give the end of my thread a overhand knot, maybe 2, or I tie it to the previous thread that I have used. I am going to show you the stitches from easiest to hardest, so we are going to start with the back stitch. Pull the needle to the front of the thread, move over about 3 to 5 millimeters, and then pull your needle back to the back of the fabric. Then we are going to go over about 3 or 5 millimeters next in the direction of the line that you're trying to make. Pull the needle to the front and then go back to the end of the previous stitch to make a solid line. You can do the pattern in whatever order you like and with whatever colors you choose. I tended to do mine in this order, but sometimes it was more convenient because I already had one thread on the needle. I was already using that color, or I was nearby and I had a little bit. So just feel free to do it in whatever order suits you. But I am going to demonstrate the stitches, like I said, from easiest to hardest, in my opinion. So this back stitch you can use for any outline, stem. Say the line has a bit of a wiggle, you can vary the lengths of the stitches to follow the curve a little bit better. So I'm doing them very big here to show for an example, but I end up doing stitches much smaller.
You are going to use the back stitch to go all the way around the outline of this hammerhead shark, as well as the gills. And for the stem of the, kelp, which would be a little bit inaccurate because hammerheads live in the Bahamas where there is no kelp.
But anyways, there's my finished shark. I also use the back stitch on the outside of the sand dollar, which is finished here, you can see, and then the stem on this sort of kelp stem. Anyways, the next stitch is the chain stitch. I believe this was in the previous one as well. So pull your needle to the front. In the same hole, pull your needle to the back. Go over a couple of millimeters and pull your needle to the front, catching that loop that you made. So you are kind of sewing within the same spot, but you are catching that loop with your thread for the next stitch. How tight you pull affects how round the chains are. And when you get to the end of the line, you're just going to kind of tack the end of the final loop by pulling your needle to the back of the fabric, just like a millimeter or so over, and that is our nice finished chain stitch. So you're going to use that here for the bottom. I did some sort of like corally, kelpy sort of wiggles underneath the shark, starting from the bottom to the top to get this sort of effect. The next stitch has a lot of names. It's the long short stitch, the long and short stitch, the brick stitch, the fill stitch. I've heard a lot of things. You start by making one long stitch next to one stitch about half the height, and you go ahead in that fashion all the way across the bottom line of whatever shape you're trying to fill. I did it more spread out here so you can see what I was doing, but I found on my final piece I liked it a little better once they were close together. The second row, once you finish the first, should all be stitches of the same length. So I started the short one and did one long, and then I went to the top of the long one and did another one long. So you can see the sort of staggering effect that you get from making the stitches all the same length in the remaining rows. That really confused me when I was learning about this stitch. So only the first row has those little half stitches and the last row just to fill in the gaps. So you can see why they call this the brick stitch, but it would work well for any sort of big area of color you're trying to fill in, and some people use it for thread painting, which is kind of what we're doing here. So up the length of this sort of coral tree, I use the darkest color and I alternate it with the medium color to make kind of like a striped corally reef tree. I'm not as well versed on reef species as I am with, or I guess coral species as I am with sharks, but you can see the effect there. The different lengths of your stitches affects sort of the perspective. That's sort of the like, as you get better at embroidery, the things you'll notice. I will admit, not my strongest area on the fill stitch. I'm really good at outlines, but this is my final coral tree. The next stitch is the Lazy Daisy stitch, which we have next to the chain here because it's almost the same technique. You bring your needle to the front of the fabric and back down to the back through the same hole, go up a little bit, and then catch that loop with your thread. Make it as tight or as loose as you want, and then go back in through the same hole just like at the end of the chain stitch. Make sure you don't get knotted, which I always do here. And then you just kind of make single tack loops. So you can do these as separate as you like, as big as you like. You could make it rounder, you can make it flatter. But the point is they can stand alone, or you can group them together like we are going to do for the pattern. You can use your needle to kind of adjust, make it even. I used this stitch for the end little flowers on the taller reef we did with the long and short stitch. You can see how those sort of work out. I also use this stitch with half embroidery thread on the sand dollar. So embroidery thread has actually 6 threads. I split my thread in half and untangled it as best as I could, so I was only working with 3. And then I did that Lazy Daisy, that same thing, to make the middle of the sand dollar after I threaded with only 3 threads. So then I went towards the middle, made my sand dollar holes, I guess, and there is my finished sand dollar. The next stitch is the buttonhole stitch. Pull your needle to the front of the fabric and then go up a couple of inches. And then we are just going to catch that thread on our next poke up with the needle. So you are kind of, if you're imagining 2 parallel lines like a railroad, we are going to go from the bottom rail to the top rail and catch the loop that we're making on the next bottom rung. In this pattern, we are kind of using this as a textured satin stitch, and you can see the different effects of doing them more spread out versus doing them close together. If you're going to do it along a squiggly line, there are different effects to be had by keeping the length of the stitch the same, making them closer, making them shorter, making them farther apart. We're going to use these for the arms of the starfish here in the bottom left corner of the pattern. I just follow the line and use that for the bottom of my buttonhole stitch. But if you get a little lost or you find you can't keep the length consistent, you can take a pencil and widen those triangles out, and that might help you be a little bit more even. The next stitch has a bunch of names. We're calling it the branch stitch. It's also called a Roman. So we're going to start with a single stitch from the top of the leaf to the bottom, just a couple millimeters. We're going to make a loop from the left to the right, and then we're just going to tack it right in the middle, down the center, going up and then going back down in the same hole. So again, we're going to pull our needle to the front from the left of the leaf shape, pull it down to the back of the fabric on the right side of the leaf shape. Before we tighten all the way, catch it, and then do a pull the needle from the back to the front in almost the same hole to tack that across, and keep that sort of center line. It just makes like a nice little ridged middle, kind of like the stem of a leaf. The branch stitch is also called the Roman stitch, the plume stitch. I just thought it was an easier way to keep the kelp leaves in this pattern consistent. I tried a bunch of different kinds of leaf stitches, and this one I think was the easiest for beginners. So get creative with it, spacing out how long you make the tack stitch, how close together you do the left to right stitches, like each row of stitches. You can get different effects by doing them closer together, making that middle stitch longer or shorter, and fill in all of the kelp leaves here on the pattern. I found that this one was really forgiving for this kind of difficult shape that I drew up. So I think it really did end up looking like kelp, even though, again, hammerheads would not be anywhere near kelp, but that's fine. The next stitch here is the French knot. This is our final stitch. This is the hardest. So you're going to wrap your thread twice around the needle, hold the thread with your other hand, and then kind of catch that knot to make a knot, right? We're going to wrap twice, pull, and catch the knot. You can also get different effects by wrapping once. You can get a smaller French knot that way, or a bigger French knot by wrapping 3 times. And going back down into the same hole for all of these. You can also use French knots to fill an area. Like I'm doing here, I'm kind of just bunching them together to make sort of a circle. This is kind of tricky to get. Practice. I promise by the end of this pattern, you are going to be so good at it. So I use this middle color to make the front smaller piece of coral here. And then I use the lightest color to make the background coral, and I bunch all those French knots together. I use small ones on the tips or bigger ones as needed. And I think you will definitely have it by the end, but I just wanted to cook this up and make a bunch of different textured ocean life. I get so tired of the floral samplers, so I just wanted to try something new. And that is our French knots, which I think would actually cover all of them. There is a good quick update. There we go. That is our finished piece here. So you may have gotten a little bit of puckering if this is your first time, especially maybe towards the long and short stitch like I did. I'm going to take a pencil. It's a little bit easier if we take it out of the hoop actually, and just kind of try and get some of the pencil markings. You could wash it, but I always get a little bit afraid of the threads on the edge of the thing. Not that it really matters, but that would get the pencil out. So pull your piece nice and tight in the hoop as soon as you're done. And then we are going to take, flip it over to the back side. We are going to make sure it's nice and tight, and then take whatever thread you have left, and make sure it's just long enough to go around the entire hoop, and then plus like 6 inches or so. Leave a tail. You don't have to tie a knot, and we're just gonna do a simple whip, or a simple straight stitch, I should say, not a back stitch because that'll be a little bit too much, but a running stitch up through the front to the back, all the way around the length of our piece, pretty close to the hoop, maybe about 2 inches, not 2 inches, sorry, 2 millimeters up. Again, if you are confused by this process, I covered it a little bit less quick in the previous video. We're just going to go all the way around, and then when we make it to the other end of the hoop, we are going to take our remaining tail, pull these 2 tails nice and tight, and then just go ahead and tie them with, here we go. So yes, take our 2 tails, cross them to pull it tight, and then you can just do it like, you know, a shoelace. Be gentle because you don't want to pop it out of the hoop, but that just keeps the ends behind. So I just tie these just like the first step of a shoe, and then tie it again, tie a nice knot, go ahead and trim these 2 threads nice and close, and then I just kind of don't like this excess fabric, so I'll go like 2 centimeters from the hoop all the way around, just enough fabric for that stitch you made to still be there, but just trim away the excess. It just makes it look a little bit neater. And Here we go, just about done. And there we have it. I love this project. If you need any help, please don't hesitate to come on in the Hangar or reach out to us on social media. I would love to see what you make, and I will see you next time.